And today, I'd like to present our OIT Faculty Fellow, Dr. Robert Spurko in English. The IT Community of Practice is actually an initiative for our faculty fellows. And so he will present today's presenter.
I see we have a distinguished former OIT faculty fellow here.
No, I wasn't a fellow, I just done a lot of stuff.
Oh, that's right. You might as well have been one. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I'm Rob Spurko. I'm the OIT faculty fellow. I recommend that you, if you're a faculty member, apply for this. It's a great experience, has been so far. What I'm focusing on is actually accessibility, kind of the main things. I do disability studies. But it sort of spilled over into an interest in digital humanities. And I was talking with Ashley about some things. Alas, she is no longer with us, having moved on to the greener, more concrete and steel fields of New York City. But anyway, so, but there's still considerable interest. There's a lot, it's a very fertile and I think energetic field here. So I thought it would be good to get some people who are doing some things in different areas to talk about what they're doing, how it connects maybe to both the research but pedagogy, right, and teaching, and what kind of opportunities are out there for that as well. So I want to have give you some ideas about what's going on, short presentations from people doing it, and then we'll have a larger discussion about the direction we're going in here at UT, options, ideas, putting together some things. So yeah, so I'll go just in the order that we have them here listed on the website. And so our first two, I'd like to ask Alex Bentley and Mark Freeman from Anthropology, who are talking about, well, a class that you all are teaching in the spring, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well,
Let me give you all this, and if you're both going to talk, you can just pass it between you, but pick it up better on the camera.
just hold it here.
Yeah, I'll just put it on top of it.
Mark and I have not taught together here. This is my first year as head of anthropology. But I previously taught a course called Big Data Social Sciences at University of Houston in both an anthropology department, and then I taught it again in a political science course. And it was called Big Data Social Sciences. And what we did with the kids is, both undergraduate and graduate students in the different instances, was we simply threw them right into the programming or the statistical package R that I'm sure many of you are aware of, but it required no previous experience in this. And we got them doing everything from mapping obesity by county in the United States, text mining, Twitter feeds from the presidential election last year, doing an experiment with real people, surveying them about the attractiveness of human faces, and mining an important anthropological database called the Ethnographic Atlas, and mapping cultures around the world in terms of their kinship system or things like that, and then looking for correlations between one aspect of societies and other. So a whole range of things that maybe they never thought that they could do. And the students hated it at first. They hated it first because of the learning curve getting into R, but then they generate some of these maps. And they look almost as good as something you might see in the New York Times. Not quite, but they look really good and they're really insightful. And so they're very pleased with the course by the time they get out. And like I said, we've taken students from all disciplines that happens to be taught in anthropology this year, where Mark has been doing teaching in terms of data curation to do with archaeology. So I'm going to hand over to Mark here.
I'll be really quick, but the other side of this is that I did a class in anthropology last fall, and that really sprang out of kind of data management plans, and the idea that students, particularly graduate students who are going after funding, now have to account for how they're dealing with their data, how they're making their data accessible, and how they're thinking about where that data is going to be archived and the repositories for data. So that was kind of a different kind of side of things in terms of data. So we're putting this class together. We're going to start off kind of a broad kind of defining what data is and kind of issues. And I think both of us are trying to get to an idea of kind of digital data literacy, and that's obviously a very broad skill that I think is applicable to many students, not just in anthropology. So they said keep it quick, so that's quick, right? Good.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, and you all were saying that the class is designed to be interdisciplinary in what people can get from it, right? And so, yeah, so if you have grad students or fellow undergrads or whatever who might be interested in that, direct them toward that. And we'll put did you send me a flyer about it at one point?
No, I've got a
Right.
slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, send that to me and I'll send it out to people so you've got that and you don't have to remember it later. Thanks. Cool. So let's turn to how it might get used in an English class. And Jill Fennell from English has a project that she's worked on for this. And that's English 102, right?
Yes.
And the English 102 classes here are arranged as inquiry classes, they're research-based classes. And so this is kind of an interesting way of them using the research that they do in it, I think.
Okay, so the way that I am approaching DH is much less through big data, as I'm working with freshmen, and more through how I can use it to emphasize rhetorical and communicative effectiveness. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about my site. Like Rob said, all of the courses that we teach in the composition second survey are themed, and mine is themed around the South. I study Southern literature, so it kind of just works well in that way. So one of the assignments that we're asked to do as a part of the survey is an archival assignment. And so instead of writing a paper proper, I have my students do digital projects. And so I wanted to run through that project just a little bit to talk about how I teach freshmen digital humanities. And I'm not teaching this semester, so I didn't get a chance to update my my lesson or my assignment based on the digital humanities bootcamp that I went to this summer. But I was going to talk a little bit about things that I would include now, having gone through that bootcamp. So in my assignment, what I asked them to do is to find 3 to 4 objects from archives, to digitize them and make them into their own collection. So we go to places like McClung Museum here on campus, and I give them a list of museums and different types of archives that are in about a 50-mile radius, should they want to go out on their own. So part of the outcomes or the assignments are to teach them archival research, to teach them how to discuss these objects and discuss their historical significance, the basic tenets of digital humanities, and how to construct a site to best put forward their argument about why these objects are important and why they're important as a collection. And so I thought I would show you a few of my student samples. Whenever the students are finished, I have them submit to me, this was when we had Blackboard, a page through Blackboard. At the very first thing on the page has to have the URL to the site, and the URL has to work. And then underneath that, is that me? Oh. And then underneath the URL, they are to send me a short 100, 200-word description of their collection and why it's important. And so what I do once I get all of them, I put them all on my page so that we have then created our own archive of the class with lots of different collections. So I thought I'd show you 2 different types of collections that my students made. And again, the ones I'm showing you, these are true freshmen who made these sites. And so one of the things that I've learned from doing this is that if you give them a lot of freedom, even give them something challenging, they do amazing, impressive work. So because it's the South and we have so many great stuff in the museum and on campus that have to do with Knoxville, a lot of my students chose Civil War, Fort Sanders type of analysis. So this student has created a site where he looks at different artifacts that were written about the battle, 2 from the north and 2 from the south. And so he analyzes these artifacts, and one of the requirements of the assignment is that you have to give a digital representation. So again, like these come from the special collections here in the library. And so they've given you the artifact and a tombstone label and the description. And then for the actual analysis, the composition, and this one isn't great, I actually told him that I would give him some revision points if he changed the background image, because he can't really read it very well. But with all the things in the site, all of the pictures have to be citable. They all have to come either from fair use or from the museums or archives that they're using. And then, of course, they all have to have a work cited. I want to show you just one more to show you the different types of assignments, and these are all on my website. I would do a website for my class, and that's just where I keep all of their information. I had another student who, she actually works at David's Bridal in West Knox, and she was really struck by the pictures from the weddings of the McClungs. And so she did a site, this is not WordPress, where she compares the dresses and like what they meant and their evolution across time. And you can see this one's different, where we don't get the top bar where we get to choose what we see first, second, and last. The student is actually controlling the narrative, and that was her choice there. And that whenever they send in these letters at the end of, for turning in their assignment, they have the URL again, the description of the assignment, and then they have to give me a one-page kind of analysis of their own writing. What kind of platform did they choose to use? Why that platform? Is it absolutely controlled, or can the viewer kind of pick and choose what pages? Why? Why is that the best way for communicating what it is that you think is so fascinating about this collection as a whole and the individual pieces? So the student would have had to have said why it's important to prioritize the way that she wants me to see it by having these next buttons on every page. So those are 2 of the assignments. One way in which I might use something that I learned from the digital bootcamp to make this a little bit better or give my students more options in the future. Timeline was a resource that was pointed out to me that I think is really great, and it's really simple and it's free. This is the kind of thing that you could teach students how to use in 30 minutes, and so it's great. The same thing is for Story Map, which would be really great for my class whenever we talk about the South, because you can look at different places geographically and temporally. Another great easy tool is Adobe Spark. It's free. It will include a watermark, but it's kind of easy to take that off should you really want to. But 1 minute videos, and for freshman classes, I really think that's pretty much good and what we're asking them to do. But a lot of these things are accessible through this list that Ashley had already created for us. So when it comes to my students creating sites, I don't do that much digital humanities in my own research. I just find it a really great way for me to help students talk about their projects. So I am not a whiz technologically or anything. So a lot of these things that I'm having my students do, I've taught myself in the last year, or it's something that they know how to do that I don't. So what my rule generally is if you're going to need help doing the website, you have to use WordPress, because that's what I know how to use. And there's a great Linda tutorial that we get for free through this site. And so that's what a lot of my students do use. And there's something to be said for making all the students have the same platform. I do think that might make grading easier, but I have not decided to go that route, because then I would miss out on the students like the wedding dress one, where she obviously put a lot of hard work in that, and her analysis was just so great. So that's what I got. Thank you, guys.
Pass the talking stick. Thanks. So that gives you a sense that, like, even freshmen, can do some really great projects with this if you give them the right kind of environment. But speaking of mapping, Josh Jeffrey in history is working on an interesting project, and I thought
I am, and it doesn't really have much to do with pedagogy.
No, but I mean, yeah, could you come up for the,
Sure, I don't have any
that's fine.
flashy graphics today, unfortunately. Of course, in this line of work, sometimes you start having computer problems, and so I was working on this last night and had some crashes, so I just decided it'd probably be better to do this the old-fashioned way. So what I'm working on is I do American religious history and some British from 1730 on. And I've discovered that there's this historiographical divide between Canadian historians and American historians, or I should say US historians, who work on restorationist churches from about 1730 on. And when I say restorationists, I mean these groups that are all saying that they're going to go back to the Bible. The Reformation was not radical enough. We need to go all the way back to the Bible, shed all of these man-made creeds. And this is all steeped in Enlightenment thought. And so, as you can imagine, with common sense realism, these folks all thinking that they can go and look at the text or the facts as they see it without any type of tradition. And they should all be able to come to the same conclusion is kind of this idea that they all have. And of course, they all come to a million different conclusions, as we all know, because we're all probably postmodernists in here. And so you have this explosion starting in the 1730s of these Protestant churches. And as they come over to America, of course, this explosion becomes even greater as there's absolutely no legal restrictions on the creation of churches in the United States. So anyway, there's this historiographical divide between Canadian historians and American historians about the movement that came out of this, which was called the Stone Campbell movement. And Churches of Christ, which are centered in Nashville and go down into upper Alabama, east, or the independent Christian churches, which you'll find a lot of out here in East Tennessee. Johnson University here in Knoxville is affiliated with them. Milligan College in Johnson City is affiliated with them. And then the Disciples of Christ, which you'll find more in the north. U.S. historians say this group started here and they grew. They planted churches, they went out and evangelized, and then just exploded. And Canadian churches, or Canadian historians, have been a lot more sophisticated in their analysis, to say the least. They're saying, no, this movement actually started in England and it was transplanted here. And you have about 9 different sects that pop up all over the US and Canada, and these things slowly amalgamate together into this big church. And it's funny because I talk to the Canadian historians and I say, I think that's, and they tell us, well, it happened differently here in Canada. Down there in the US, there was just this big explosion of, one type of church exploding all over the map. But here it happened differently. And I try and tell them, no, actually, I think it happened the same way in the United States and in the American colonies. Well, no, it definitely didn't. And then trying to talk to American historians, and it's the same thing. It's this butting of heads, which is, it's pretty bizarre. And trying to persuade with just a narrative has not worked. And so I decided that using GIS and collecting bigger data, folks being able to visualize this process may help make that argument convincing to them. And so what I've been doing is slowly going through religious journals, popular religious journals from 1730 on, and culling congregational data. Because what happens in all these journals is you have this whole section where people would write in, these ministers would write in and say, hey, I was in Nashville this week, and I baptized 12 people. And I also pulled 6 people from the Free Will Baptists and brought them over, and I settled the congregation here. Or I was in Ontario, Canada last week, and I found these 2 different congregations, a Free Will Baptist congregation and a Glassite congregation, and I brought them together and did some preaching, and now they're all one big church. And so over time, using both R and traditional GIS software, The plan is that I'll be able to show a progression from the Eastern Seaboard west, showing these churches popping up, showing their affiliation, showing them grow, because these people are constantly writing in and saying, I visited this church that I was at, a year ago, and they've had 50 more baptisms, and the church has grown. And so being able to show that change over time graphically, and then once that's done, doing a network analysis to kind of show just how these churches completely interlinked. So anyway, that's what I'm working on. So.
So it's an interesting way. Jill, you were talking about the most effective way to present an argument, right? That sort of rhetorical consideration. And I think that's a great example of an argument that will be a lot more understandable to people, a lot more visually compelling, because you can actually see how that developed. And again, in terms of, the level of sophistication of what you're doing is not something that, a freshman might be able to pull out like that actual, data stuff, but it can give you ideas about things, especially for upper level classes. And we're actually about to hear about an undergraduate research project in sociology that they put together. So I will turn it over to Louise
Yes.
Seamster
Yes.
and Nicole Proctor.
Hi, I'm Nicole Proctor. This is my mentor, Dr. Louise Seamster. We're kind of going to present on a project we're doing with undergraduate research using digital scholarship. Our project is on the Flint water crisis. We saw a need, obviously, after the crisis broke. A lot of people were affected. There was a lot of lead poisoning, and decided to make a project out of it. When we started it, we had no idea the scope that we were going to be undertaking, and I think we would have done things a little differently in the beginning if we knew then, but in any case, we are here now. Our main research question is, how do the issues of power and racism map onto the state-level entities involved in the Flint water crisis? To do that, we had to download well over 300,000 emails, and we're in the works of doing qualitative and quantitative analysis, and we are all undergraduate workers right now. This summer, after the Digital Humanities Bootcamp, we worked on the situations involving the Legionnaires' outbreak, and we did get an article in an online journal, which was neat as an undergraduate.
As Nicole said, I'm a postdoctoral associate. I forget what the other word is in my title. And I don't have graduate students or funding at my disposal, but I have been teaching a research methods course, and one semester at the end, I happened to say to my students, if you want to work with a professor, just ask them. And then 2 of them asked me, and I hadn't thought of that. So I had this project knocking around that I never thought I could do. I've been working on emergency management in Michigan for my dissertation, and had been watching FLINT evolve, and had noticed that there was this amazing data set of the emails that the governor released, all pertaining to the Flint water crisis. But as we'll explain later, they're not intended to be easily accessed. We have been working to just manage and wrangle them, but also start to look into them, like as we're going through, to get some inductive ideas about what we're going to be looking for more systematically. And just to give you a tiny review of what's been going on in Flint, this has been building since the city was taken over by an emergency manager, who is a state-appointed single person that replaces the city's government. And that law was inflicted on half of the Black population of Michigan and only 2% of white residents of Michigan. So I was studying a different city taken over, and I was studying it because I was worried that something like this could happen when you've got somebody with absolutely no accountability to the residents making financial decisions for the city. And the two primary things that I think we're trying to fight is that the two main narratives, if you know anything about the Flint water crisis, people say the water source was switched to the corrosive Flint River to save money, which we're finding is not true, and also that all levels of government are to blame, which is also, we're arguing, not true, and that the state is really bearing the brunt, should bear the brunt of responsibility for this, not the local government, which was not in power at the time. And so that's where all these different why it matters that these different agencies are talking to each other, who they're talking to, and how they're making decisions about what to do next, how they treat residents saying my water smells bad and is brown, and how they talk about them behind their back. All the ways in which action was not taken for years, as you can see in this timeline that you know, people knew ahead of time that the water was not safe to drink before they made this switch. They started getting complaints immediately after this switch. They even had the opportunity to switch back to Detroit water, which the emergency manager decided to ignore. And eventually, outside researchers were able to document that there was lead in the entire system and pushed the governor to finally declare a state of emergency. And some people have been charged in the crisis, but we're also trying to look at it more organizationally, more like a sociologist, instead of saying, you know, some people were bad, to understand more how the crisis came through organizational bureaucracy. And you know, there's a sociological concept of the normalization of deviance. So we're seeing how that applies here. But these are some of the main organizational entities we're working with. We're focusing most particularly, I would say, on the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality in the middle, and the way they were reacting, because they were in charge of maintaining public safe health in the water system. But the emergency managers factor in the governor's office and the treasury that was in charge of the emergency management, and then also the bad guy in our story, the other bad guy in our story is the Genesee County Drain Commissioner, which when you see the guy in charge, you'll see he looks like a villain. Is that the mustache that he twirls? He's not twirling it, but it looks like a twirlable thing. And this is the water authority that was making out when Flint decided to switch to water source, so that there was actually a financial incentive, but it's not Flint saving money, it's people outside Flint making money. That was my contribution. And Nicole's going to talk about us managing the data.
Trying to manage data. As we said, most of our data, well, all of our data came from online, from emails that were released. In a show of good faith and partnership with the people of Michigan, Governor Snyder decided to release a bunch of emails pertaining to the Flint water crisis, which was great for his PR. What he didn't tell you is that they're not searchable. They're one mass PDF image file, and you can't do anything with them unless you go page by page. The other bit of information we got, Dr. Mark Edwards of Virginia Tech did a Freedom of Information Act request for the Michigan's Department of Environmental Quality. And when he got those, he published those on a website, and those were publicly available. So we downloaded those as well. Like I said, the challenges we faced were that these PDFs were flat image files. They were not searchable. They were not organizable. You couldn't do keyword searches. You couldn't do anything with it. So we turned to the OIT department, bless you all, and we were shown Adobe Acrobat Reader Pro, which uses an OCR technology to create a searchable text. And what that means, if you're not familiar, is it's an optical character recognition software, which goes through and recognizes individual characters and turns them into a word that your computer can read and search. Yeah. It doesn't. There's still a lot of manual things that you have to go in and do. As we're going through these, we're finding a lot of mistakes. We're finding a lot of things where it meant to say one thing and the OCR software saw it as something else. So there isn't a count of how many emails we have. We know it's over 300,000, but when we're all said and done, it'll probably be about 1 million pages worth of information. But I mean, and I literally mean 1 million, I don't mean that exaggeratingly. So there is a lot of work to be done. And this process, there is an undergraduate that is on our team. Her name is Haley Bowles. She couldn't be here, but if she could be here, she would be explaining this to you. She spent her entire summer uploading 5 to 10 files at a time to the Adobe Acrobat OCR software to try to do this. And she's my personal hero, and I just want to give a shout out to her because she's amazing. But she couldn't be here, so. Another challenge that we found after we got it into a searchable and usable format is these files are still mass files. So when we get them into these optical character recognition, they're still one big file. So we had the challenges of how do we split these up? How do we make them uniquely identifiable? Because if you're going to do any sort of research, you have to have a reference point to point back to show where you got it from. And we also found that there are a lot of duplicates in the emails. So we divided the files into conversations, and the Adobe Acrobat actually does that. Apparently, and I don't fully understand it, maybe you do, but
it can split PDFs into bookmarks, and the Outlook program had made bookmarks for each separate email and the attachments, and so Haley found that, and she's also my personal hero, and was able to use that to make a 10,000 page PDF into 400 separate PDFs, which is a lot better.
And in doing so, when she split these up, she was able to put Bates numbers, which is just a unique identifier for each one of the pages. That being said, we're still looking for solutions for the duplicates. We still find duplicates everywhere. We're still trying to figure out a way to search through them. So we haven't completely figured that out yet. To be continued there. Data storage. Currently, we are storing them in a Google Drive file. However, we have, and who knew, Google Drive had a max limit. We have maxed out one of our Google Drive file accounts because our first set was 27.6 gigs. So our second set is considerably larger than the first, so we're still working on trying to find out a better way to store our data. And it's difficult to sort and categorize the data in Google Drive. Challenges we're facing. Which led us to NVivo. NVivo is a qualitative and quantitative, really, in a lot of ways, analysis tool, which allows us to code by keyword and themes. So as we're going through the emails, we can organize them by who sent the email, who received it, what department were they in, what were the themes of the email, were they sarcastic, were they professional, were they, referencing information that was not present in the email, claiming some sort of knowledge that everyone else doesn't have, and date. Unfortunately, most of this still needs to be hand-coded. You still have to go through manually and put these codes in individually. So we are still looking for a better way to streamline this process as well. Eventually, one of the research projects or the research products that we want to have is a database that we want to potentially put on the Trace system, where anyone can go to this website and look up at these emails. They can search by keyword searches. If a FLINT resident wants to go in and find out, well, I found out my water was poisoned on this date, and I want to search these dates around this information and find out what was said around that time, they can. It has the capability for keyword searches, sorting for sender receiver. We would really like it to be sorted by chronological dates so that we can have a timeline and kind of organize it that way. But ultimately, this is where we want to be. We want to give back to the community that we are taking so much information from and give them something that they can look at, as well as other researchers. And that's it. Specifically, Haley Bowles, again, who couldn't be here, is amazing. And we also want to thank the OIT office and the Digital Humanities office and the Joint Institute for Computational Science, who have helped us amazingly. And we have an incredible team of undergraduates as well. And this is being done without funding. This is being done without anything. This is just a bunch of undergraduates and Dr. Seamster doing this. So there's a lot that can be done. It's pretty neat.
So we've got time for questions and answers. We've got time for general conversation. One of the things I'm seeing here, though, right, is that especially in a project like this, it requires different departments across the university to collaborate, right? Like you mentioned, the OIT gave a piece, the Digital Humanities Librarian gave a piece, and what was it, the Joint
Institute for Computational Science.
The Joint Institute? Yeah. Right. So Oak Ridge, we're actually using Oak Ridge for this. And so that's an interesting, and again, one of the other fascinating things for me about it is the ability of using this stuff to provide it back to the community in a way that they can access, right? Which is one of the, I think, great potentialities of work in digital humanities, is making it available not just to academic audiences, but, in ways that can empower people and inform people. Right, and a project even like that, documenting the South, right? I can imagine some of those resources being of use or interest to the general public, even right, in certain ways. So we've got a lot of options. We've got a lot of great work that's being done. I don't know. Have any of you seen the Chronicle of Higher Education article that came out in the past week, calling digital humanities a bust? Right, and there's been a vigorous kind of response to it, and I will forward some of those to the Digital Humanities listserv if you need some good ammunition if you get into an argument with a colleague or a department head or something like that. But I think what you've seen today is ample evidence, right, that there's really interesting, rigorous, fascinating, and important work being done in this area here at this university. So. But with that, let me stop talking and just open the floor if people have questions, comments, thoughts. We'll start with that, especially questions for the presenters, and then go from there. Go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe to Jill.
Steve, do you want me to pass the mic?
All right. This is maybe to Jill and Louise and Nicole. And I was just wondering and maybe others too, how, I know English and sociology, right, are not necessarily coding disciplines, and I was wondering what was the undergraduate response, like how much coding or how much software acquisition did you expect of your students? Was teaching them WordPress or other software difficult? How about that? Was it Navivio? Did they have to use that? And maybe talk about your experiences with that.
Thanks. While others were talking, I made a list of what tools we were expecting students to experiment with, and they include, or probably not, they're not, yeah, I have some more. Evernote, EndNote, NVivo, that we've experimented with that timeline tool that you put up, Google Docs, and Google the whole folder system, and Haley, especially in Adobe Pro. And those are the ones that I can list off the top of my head. I know we were also experimenting with the OneNote notebook system, which is messy. But it wasn't R. I mean, they haven't been coding HTML or anything. However, it is a steep learning curve, and I know that they were overwhelmed the first few weeks because I was showing them everything. But I was also having them learn EndNote from a librarian and having Rochelle Butler from OIT come in to teach them NVivo. So I was using as many of the resources of the university as I could so that they would also have them to call on later if they got stuck, or just see that it wasn't just me and my craziness telling them to do all of these things at once. And I think people are getting more familiar with it. We're having more technical difficulties with using NVivo collectively, like sharing files, than in addition to them having to learn NVivo. So there's like different levels, like the collaborative aspect of it is as hard as just learning the software.
Cur- Currently, In Vivo doesn't have a collaborative server thing, so it's really disappointing, but everybody kind of has to download the project and the files individually and then upload them back again, so that is a challenge.
Largely, I don't ask my students to know any coding whatsoever. The sites that I had them use are mostly drag and drop sites like WordPress or Wix. This past spring was my second time teaching this assignment, and so I did change a lot of things based on some of the difficulties that I saw with my students. First was that I made it the first assignment of the semester instead of the last one. Because with the composition office, they get to revise and resubmit one assignment. That way, if they did struggle a lot with it, that could be the one that they revise. Largely, students don't need that much help with the WordPress and the Wix. They're usually pretty good at that. I will have about 5 a semester that really need a lot of help from me. And I can do a lot of that in office hours and just getting them to come in. And if you can look through my sites live all the time, so you can look through them and you can see that there's a difference between the students who obviously have a sort of felicity with this type of programming and the ones that don't. But I try to construct my rubric so that even if your site isn't as sleek as someone else's, if you can still accomplish what I'm asking you to accomplish with the assignment, then that's fine. I did have one student one time who actually knew coding, and he completely made his own website without even worrying about these platforms, which that was absolutely amazing. But I try to stick to the platforms because the semester does go so quickly, and while I want to teach them digital humanities and have them think about their assignment and how to engage in a sort of public academic conversation at the same time, it's still like the writing. We have to focus a lot on that in class. So.
I just want to point out one thing. You mentioned earlier something about Spark, and I don't know if our photographer wants to address that. Steve actually teaches a Spark workshop or Adobe products. And I want to point out that any software that you may find out there that you're interested in trying, you want to check first to see if OIT provides it through our statistical research group or through our OIT training group. Because what the student presented in your class is very, very neat. And it did not require coding, but sometimes they may not be aware that there are different ways they can present that. And what I thought Spark did just as good a presentation as those who were using Wix or WordPress. So just want to point that out anytime you're looking at different software programs to look at our website or contact OIT, our training group, to see if there's something that we can provide. Because we also do service where we will come to a department and provide training to your faculty. What we used to call Lucky 7, now we call it requested training. So.
And some of the I'll just add to that, some of the faculty can prefer to add it to their class, like take one class time or a period of it, and we can come in and do that workshop just for your students. So they're not trying to find a time that fits for their calendar. A lot of people don't know that we'll do that. The other thing is with lynda.com being campus-wide, if you have a specific skill that you're wanting the students to know but you don't want to take class time, you can pick playlists or portions of lynda.com components or classes and then have them work on those after class. And you can then see if you want to give them credit for doing that or it's on their own. You can actually go in and be a little mini admin to see if they've accomplished that. So there's a couple of different ways to get through the hoops with that technology part. The complex part's still a challenge, I think.
One of the things I would bring to your attention, you caught my ear just a minute ago when you said that we ran out of Google storage. If you log into Google with your NetID and NetID password, you have unlimited storage. There's no bottom to that, so enjoy.
Thank you. Isn't that also where they can get rid of the watermark with Spark?
Okay.
Yeah, if you have a Creative Cloud membership, the watermark is not there. You just flip a little switch and it goes away.
And that's covered under that $50 a year.
Yes, It's quite a deal to get all of Adobe products for that inexpensive a price.
Nicole, I was wondering, have you all looked at the Stanford named entity recognizer at all? It's a project that Stanford runs that will look at text and try and code it for you.
No, we've looked at the Harvard Inquirer, kind of just like as an analysis tool, but I have not looked at that, so I may look at those.
Yeah, it will, it comes in different iterations. I've used it in TEI, but I know use it in other systems as well, and it'll go through and try and recognize names and places and dates and encode that the way that you want to code it.
That is
So
awesome,
that's
thank you so much.
Yeah.
We've been holding off on some of the systematic things because it seems like there has to be precedent for this. We've found research on the Enron body of emails, but that seems to be like the one pre-FLINT major archive that we can find people working with similarly. But this summer I found out the Joint Institute of Computational Science will also help you write grants like NSFs so that they can be then paid to do the computational assistance. So I'm strongly considering applying for the NSF with their help, so that rather than us spending all our time trying to find the dates systematically, that we can spend our time coding thematically, and then somebody else should be doing that work. There's plenty for everybody to do.
I had a question actually for Nicole. As an undergraduate, I mean, what do you feel like you've gotten out of this project?
I can honestly say that through this project, and this is not a knock on any professor in any way, but I've learned more in this project than I have in any classroom. I've learned everything from the technology aspect of it, which a lot of these projects I didn't know existed, to theoretical things, applying theory to the coding and stuff that we're doing. As an undergrad, it's been an amazing experience. And two, I think the other thing that I get out of it, and that I have gotten out of it, is it is such an interdisciplinary thing. It's not just one department that we're working with. It's not just sociology and only sociology. It's sociology, it's OIT, there's a little bit of psychology in it. There's a little bit of sort of like anthropology in that it's its own city. They have their own kind of thing. So the interdisciplinary approach to it is really neat too, which is something that when you pick a major, you don't necessarily get as an undergraduate. So from that aspect, I have learned more in this project than I have in any classroom. Not to knock any of my previous professors, but.
That's a good pitch for the experiential learning program here as well.
Yes.
Same kind of thing.
For sure.
I wanted to point out the Adobe Spark that we're using there. We also have Microsoft Sway. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a very similar type of program, but it comes with the Office 365 subscription that we have. And the one advantage that Sway has over Spark is it's much more accessible. So it has accessibility features built in, whereas the Adobe, it's in their discussion forums that maybe they're working on it, but they haven't really made it accessible yet.
Okay, I'll check that out, thank you.
I had a question for Nicole and Luis. Is there, I guess, beyond like the manually uploading 5 to 10 files at a time, have you looked at other ways of like automating that OCR process?
Yeah, that's what Haley was doing all summer. She works at OIT as a manager, so she had a computer. She still has a computer actually doing that, and now she's processing them all just to like check her work. So she's probably had a computer running doing this since May. Non-stop, yeah. But yes, it's not, and that's where it really does come down to, like on the one hand, I think a lot of students could be brought really far into this research project, but it also does come down to whether you find a student who happens to have amazing skills, like Haley does, and interest in learning what she doesn't know. Because like I would never have thought I would be doing a research project and have an undergrad just doing data management and cleaning that I am not involved in, and just like updating me on what's happening. And I'm not sure how many more times that will occur in my life, but it's cool. And like, and I'm going to like, you know, I'm going to see whatever I can do to help Haley in her future career, you know, get credit for that. It's good, and I also hope that there will be other students who can be like, you know, can be integrated into a project. And we're working on a class with people who are coming into it now, and some people have been working on it since the spring. So it's kind of an experiment with like how deep in do you have to go to get something out of it. And I think you can get something out of it at different levels involved.
So how much of the process is automated, and then like what has to be cleaned up?
The problem of having everybody in an office search for FLINT and then send out all their emails means that you've got 12 copies of every email that has people on it, for instance. Then you have every threaded email separately. That's a giant problem. And it's such a small thing, but it's big. And so it's figuring out how to search by date systematically when some of them are attachments that maybe got split off from an email. That's where the messiness comes in.
I think Library of Congress is working on managing emails in an archive, because this isn't a unique problem. This is a huge problem right now. Managing archives of emails is really, really problematic. And I seem to remember there was a working group last year that was started. And also, I mean, just looking at digital asset management software might give you some inroads as to kind of how to manage emails as a thing as well. There might be some avenues in just from DAM software. If you don't buy DAM's product, it's just the way they do things that might be helpful.
Thank you. That's why we have backed off some of these things, because and prefer to wait.
Yeah, email archiving is a known horror story.
Right.
So I mean, it just is.
Okay.
And Mark, you've done a lot of work with online communities and things like that, right?
No, my thing is online data. I mean, my kind of research interest is in. I mean, I've been looking at government data, but I've also been looking at archaeology and museum data, and how you make that data available to multiple audiences. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Well, we're out of time officially. If you all want to hang out for a little while and continue conversations, we have, hopefully, if you came in, we don't have your email, if you wouldn't mind signing in and letting us have that. And again, I can send out some information based on some of the things that have been said here, so everybody has access to these tools and links and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think it sort of points out that, you know, we kind of need to keep this ball rolling here at UT. You know, and it's worth thinking about what kind of institutional investments and you know, personnel investments and things like that would we like to see. I mean, I think it's time to start making cases for it to different departments and entities. You know, what would help us do this work better? And if we can start kind of asking those questions too. You know, what do I need to do my work, you know, more effectively? You know, doesn't hurt to ask. And so I just want to put that as a bee in everybody's bonnet, so to speak, and be thinking about that going forward. So anyway, thank you all for coming today. I found it fascinating and wonderful, but then I need to be enthusiastic about things.